Hello, and welcome to Mrs. Brown's Stitching School at Hope Corner Farm. I'm Mrs. Brown, and today we are going to learn how to create half square triangles in a quick and easy manner. Now, these half square triangles that I'm using today are going to be used in my half square triangle rag quilt. So I have flannel fabric for this tutorial. And also my flannel fabric, I'm kind of lucky, it does not have a right side or a wrong side to it. So I don't have to worry about making sure that the right sides are facing each other. The one thing I do need to worry about with this fabric in particular is if you look closely at both of them, they do have a direction to the pattern. So I just need to make sure that my pattern directions are facing in the same way. So to start, I have cut these squares 7 inches by 7 inches, both of them. And what I need to do is I take my darker colored fabric and I place it on the bottom. And then I'm going to take my lighter color fabric and place it on top. Again, I do not have to worry about right or wrong sides. If these were fabrics that had a right or wrong side, I would make sure that the right sides were facing each other. So now I try and make sure to get all my edges lined up nice and evenly, okay? Then I need to work with my diagonal. For creating this half square triangle, we are looking at drawing 2 lines that will be a 1/2 inch off of that diagonal line. So how do I do that? What I do is I take my quilter's ruler, this is a 6 inch by 24 inch ruler, and on this, every line here is a 1/4 inch. So 2 lines would be 1/2 inch. So I need to line this 1/2 inch line up on the diagonal of my block. So it looks like this. I'm just taking and lining up that 1/2 inch line on the points of the diagonal. So if you look closely, you can see that the 1/2 inch line is right here on the point, and the 1/2 inch line is right here on the point. So now I'm going to take my pencil. You can use a marking pen or whatever. I just always happen to have pencils handy, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to draw this line. This is going to be our stitching line for the half square triangle. So I'm just going to make sure it's nice and marked with my pencil so you can see the line. Now I need to do the same thing on the other side of the diagonal. So I'm going to flip it over here, and I'm going to again line up my 1/2 inch line right on the diagonal points here. So again, 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch here, just making sure, and I'm going to draw this 1/2 inch line. So there are my 2 lines. This is where I'm going to sew. I'm going to sew down this line, and eventually we'll cut this block in half right down the middle of that. But first we have to sew, so let's move over to the sewing machine to accomplish that. Okay, I'm over at my sewing machine now, and I am going to sew down the lines that we marked earlier. So what I do is right at the edge of the block, I line my needle up with the line that I have drawn there. And so I'm going to start, take a couple of stitches, and then I am going to do a back stitch to reinforce my stitching, so that way when I wash my quilt, it's less likely to fall apart. So I'm going to sew across right down this line. And then when I get to the edge again, I am going to do a couple of back stitches and then go forward one more time. Again, that helps us to make sure that our quilt does not fall apart. So I bring this out, I'm going to clip my threads. Now I need to sew down the other diagonal line that I have drawn. So I flip my block around so that the other diagonal line ends up underneath my needle. And I'm just going to repeat the process again. I'm going to start, take a little back stitch, go forward again, and just sew across on that line. So then when I get to the end again, I need to do a couple of back stitches and then go forward again. So now I'll clip my threads again and we'll head back over to the cutting board to cut our block apart. All right, so we're back over at the cutting board. The first thing I want to do is trim any excess thread that came off with my stitching. So I'm going to just quickly clip these long pieces of thread and get them out of the way. Oh, missed one right there. Just clip that. Okay, now we need to cut this block in half. So what I do this time is I take my 6 by 24 inch ruler again, but this time I line up the edge right on that diagonal. So again, here's my diagonal point butted up right next to that edge, and here is my diagonal point butted up right against that edge. So then I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to simply cut right down that diagonal. And what we're left with here are 2 half square triangle blocks. Now we do need to do some trimming and some pressing here before they are done, but if you open them up, you can see that you have your half square triangle. Now for my rag quilt, I'm actually going to do this opposite, and I'm going to have this seam allowance facing outside of the quilt, because with a rag quilt we'll clip this and make it look nice and worn. But if it were a regular quilt, that seam allowance would hide on the inside of the half square triangle. So what I'm going to do first is I am going to press my seam to one side. So I'm going to run to the iron and do that, and I'll be right back. All right, so I have pressed my seam to one side. That will help us when we're trimming. And so to trim, I have a 6.5 inch by 6.5 inch square quilter's ruler, and it has a diagonal line printed on it, which is key for trimming up this block. So what I do is basically, I'm gonna first things first kind of get close to lining up my diagonal seam here with the diagonal line on the block. So I'm going to line that up there, and I will move this over just a little bit so you can see it just a little bit better. I apologize. Okay, so again, I'm lining up this diagonal seam, or diagonal line with this diagonal seam. So there, I've got that lined up. Now what I need to do is, eventually this block is getting trimmed down to 6 inches by 6 inches for the quilt that I am using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of, keeping that diagonal line lined up, I'm going to gradually pull away or pull it down so I get revealed some fabric that needs to be trimmed. And we'll just start with that. We'll just trim this off right here. Sorry, I'm kind of doing this backwards. Oh, yep. See if I can get this. Sorry, trying to do this the wrong way. I should have flipped my block a little bit there. Okay, so get that out of there. So now I have a nice straight edge to work from. So I'm just going to rotate my block like this. Again, I'm going to line up my diagonal here. And then I am also, since this is a 6.5 inch block, I need to locate my 6 inch line. And I'm going to line up my 6 inch line with that edge I just trimmed, also keeping my diagonal there. Now I'm going to trim off excess that I have over here. So that's all trimmed. Okay, now I've got 2 sides that are trimmed. I'm going to rotate as well here. Now, I locate my diagonal. I put the diagonal on there. And again, I am going to, oops, let's flip this so it works a little bit better for me. Locate my diagonal, line it up with 6 inches as well, and with both edges that I've already straightened. So this edge was straightened already, so I'm lining up my 6 inches there. And this edge was straightened already, so I'm lining up my 6 inches there. I'm going to trim off the excess on this side. So now I have 3 sides that have been trimmed. Rotate so I can do this last side. So again, I line up my diagonal, and now every single side, except for the one I'm currently trimming, should be lined up with my 6 inches. So there's my 6 inch line. Whoops. Gotta fix that just a little bit. There we go. There's my 6 inch line. Scooch this down just a hair. So this is hitting the 6-inch line, and up here there shouldn't be anything showing either. So this is my last side to trim to get a nice 6-inch block. So there it is after. If this were ironed, you can see that we have trimmed off this excess right here and have squared it up so it is 6 inches square. Okay, the last thing I need to do for my quilt is I need to iron open this seam allowance right here. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the iron and do that real quick. Okay, so now we have our fully trimmed block, and I have pressed open my seam. I do this for my quilt because, again, with my rag quilt, this is going to be on the outside of my quilt, and I'm going to end up trimming or clipping this seam to get a nice worn and ragged look. So there it is, half square triangle block, and it was pretty simple to make, and you get 2 of them from 2 7-inch squares. And again, this is a 6-inch by 6-inch half square triangle block. Hope you enjoyed.